Welcome into K-State Online. I'm Mason Voth. That is Drew Galloway. After a week in Kansas City, here we are back in our respective homes. What a week it was in Kansas City. I tell you what, I had a lot of fun there. I don't know about you, Drew, or some of these others, but I know that we had an enjoyable time, and I love the Big 12 tournament in Kansas City. It has proven time and time again to be the correct spot to have the Big 12 tournament, and I'm sure there's not a single fan base of the 16 in the Big 12 that would argue that, right?
I mean, I always think that it's a good time, and it's so easy for us too, which is nice. But Kansas City is by far the best place that it's been probably ever. So you look at that, and even with the attendance being a little bit smaller this year, it still is one of the more well-attended conference tournaments of all the power conferences. So
Yeah.
other people just don't know ball.
Yeah, if you just for the sake of a comparison, if you're looking around and you're trying to figure out, well, who could have done better, the final year of the Pac-12 tournament, they got 76,000 people there in Las Vegas. The Big 12 last year got 118,300. Now you're probably saying, oh well, but the Big 12 had 14 teams last year. The Pac-12 only had 12. Okay, well, don't worry, I did the math on it. The total attendance divided by teams participating in the league. Last year, the Big 12 had 8,450 per team, and the Pac 12 had 6,342 per team. And then you look at it and you say, okay, well, what was it this year? Yeah. Total attendance this year for the Big 12 tournament was just over 106,000. So you'd have to divide it by 16. That brings it down to 6,641. That is by far the lowest attendance per team that the Big 12 tournament has had since it ended up in Kansas City. And Drew, I ask you, what changed from last year to this year with the Big 12?
They added 4 teams that are far away.
Oh,
Well, 3
no,
teams that are far away and
they
1 team
added.
that's somewhat close.
Yeah, they added some Pac-12 schools who apparently care way more about basketball on Twitter than they do in person. So we're going to get into that today because look, as somebody that is not people know I'm not a big Kansas City guy. When I get a chance to dump on Kansas City, I'm going to do it sometimes because I think chill. It's not that impressive of a city, folks. You know, it's got the Royals. That's about all it does for me. But it also has the Big 12 tournament, and I realize and respect the fact that P&L and that whole area downtown, that is the perfect spot for the Big 12 tournament. And we'll get into all of that with everything else that we have going on today. But first, a reminder, we are in March, and this happens to be St. Patrick's Day, Drew. You appear to have your green on. You were conscious of this.
One of us is celebrating St. Patrick's Day. The other one is apparently not.
I don't know that I own a green shirt. I have one green golf shirt. It did just get washed yesterday, but I was not going to just put that on for this. And yeah, I don't think I have any other green shirts. So you can pinch me if you want.
I'm good.
Okay. Well, St. Patrick's Day, here we sit, getting closer and closer to 5 months away from kickoff of K-State, Iowa State, and Ireland. We have to talk about the 2025 Aer Lingus College Football Classic. And if you are still sitting there thinking, oh, man, I screwed the pooch, I missed out on my opportunity to get single game tickets, what am I going to do? You don't even have to worry about booking your flight because everything that you need will be done through cats2ireland.com. You still have a couple of options waiting there for you. One of the options which is a 3-city trip. You'll obviously get to go to the game, but you'll also get to experience Galway and Cary. By the way, we already talked about it. You know, go see Moby Ike Garuka's homeland. There's only 2 rooms remaining there. So jump on it now. If you are still thinking about wanting to go to this, experience it in the best way possible, go to cats2ireland.com and be there when the Cats and Clones kick off the football season in 2025. This means also that Drew has an Ireland fun fact for us.
Yeah, I have a lot of fun facts today. One is not really an Ireland fun fact, but that's another story. Because you said that I
Okay.
can do as loosely related to Ireland
Yep,
as I can.
that is true.
So my first fun fact today, it's St. Patrick's Day, obviously. The first St. Patrick's Day parade was actually held in the United States. So that's interesting. It's been celebrated in Ireland since the 1600s, but the first parade was in St. Augustine, Florida, which is very interesting. Another fun fact that I have is that St. Patrick actually wore blue instead of green, but people ended up just liking green better.
Interesting.
And then my loosely related to Ireland fun fact is I actually know, I think, 3 people that have St. Patrick's Day birthdays, and one is my mom. So
Wow.
that is why I have like green stuff like on hand. Like I have green K-State shirts like for this specific reason.
Okay. Well, so yeah, you're a St. Patrick guy by nature. You
Yeah.
have to be. So I don't know that I know a ton of anything else. I did just hear Rory McIlroy won in the playoff at the Players this morning, and Jay Monahan, that little weasel, said that this is the second time that Rory has won the Players on St. Patrick's Day. So, which this goes back to a conversation we had a while back where I got him flip flopped. I know which one is which. I just, when I was verbalizing, it was wrong. Rory, a Northern Ireland guy. So, like,
Yeah.
how does that pertain to Ireland and St. Patrick's Day? That, you know, it kind of feels a little cheesy. Maybe something with, I don't know, just stereotyping by Jay Monahan, but, you know, whatever. Although I do know that in the whole Northern Ireland thing, there's a big whole deal about that, where Rory's family is actually more on the Ireland side, but they live in Northern Ireland. It's a big thing. Go read about it. There's a story and discussion on it after Rory sang karaoke with Shane Lowry after they won the Zurich Classic last year, and an Ireland flag and everything that goes on with that. Rory tries to be very apolitical, but his family does have a side and all that. So interesting, fascinating, doesn't matter. That's my Ireland fun fact for you today.
There you go.
Let's talk a little basketball now, Drew, because the season is officially over. All of these brackets have come out for the CBI, the KBI, the FBI, the CIA, and the Crown, and the NIT. And K-State's not involved in any of them. Jerome Tang made that pretty clear after K-State lost to Baylor last week. He is very aware, I would say, that this team, as it's constructed currently, did not need to play postseason basketball because how many of these guys are actually going to be back? And like I said today, we saw what this K-State team looked like without Coleman Hawkins on the floor. And I don't want to watch that team ever again. And I certainly wouldn't want to watch that team if David Gasson also wasn't playing, which was the vibe if they had done postseason basketball. So the offseason is officially here for K-State while everybody else is gearing up for some other action. We'll talk about the women's draw for the NCAA tournament here in a little bit. If I asked you to give me 3 or 4 big picture things that you think K-State basketball needs to accomplish this offseason, what would they be? And that can go from this is the type of player they need to land, but also anything philosophical, staffing wise, because I think we would assume that there have to be staff changes, just a lot of different things and places you can take this to. So I just want to know, in your eyes, what are the 3 or 4 big things that you would be doing if you were running this basketball program?
Number one, I'm glad that you said 3 or 4 things on like a checklist, because when you said 3 or 4, the first thing that I was thinking about was like 3 or 4 words, and I was trying not to Charles Barkley my way through this. So 3 or 4 things I can definitely do. 3 or 4 words, we'll see. But the first thing would be probably staff adjustments and staff changes like that. That's probably the first thing that needs to be done. And also, like, if you are going to make staff adjustments and changes, you need to get them done by next Monday because the portal opens March 23rd. So if you can get those done, hopefully this week, and to be honest, you don't even really need to announce them publicly if they're on a team that's still playing. You just need to have them done to where you feel good about it and you know what's going on. The second would be a wholesale offensive philosophy change. Whatever the heck that they've been doing offensively the last 2 years hasn't worked. They don't get good shots consistently. They can't make shots consistently. Whatever they're doing on that end needs to change. And then I think the third thing would be just find guys who fit what you want to do. We don't really know what K-State and Jerome Tang want to do as a team and have that be their identity, because the three teams have had so different identities. Find what you want your identity to be, and then go and grab players that fit what you want your identity to be. Because it seems like the new identity that Jerome Tang wants for his team to be is to kind of mimic what Houston is. Well, you know what Houston is not? Houston is not a soft team that can't rebound and turns the ball over a ton. Find guys that can rebound the heck out of the ball and don't turn the ball over. Like, if that's what you just want to have be your baseline identity. So I think that those are probably my three things. I'm also seeing that you changed the basketball logo, and it is very sick. I can't lie.
Yeah, I've been searching for a clean version of that logo for my entire life. And shout out to sportslogos.net that I've been using since I was in like the third or fourth grade. Like, I would just spend my time on the computer going through sportslogos.net. They did some big updating, and the fact that they have that on there now, makes me want to donate money to them. I'm not going to, but if I was the type of person that donated money, that would be the cause that I would choose over any charity imaginable. So, yes, shout out to Chris Creamer and sportslogos.net, because we will be using that a lot here. This is an official Basketball Power Cat podcast.
But I think that those are probably the three things. The fourth thing that I've thought of was just do a wholesale evaluation change. But that kind of fits into like find guys that want to fit what you want your culture to be, because evaluation on and off the court, and at least the last 2 seasons has really been lacking. And I think that that's been something that's really held this program and this team back over the last 2 years, because you've had so many misses at positions that you can't afford, or you've had misses off the court that have really hampered your season. In the last 2 seasons, honestly, they've had 2 big time misses off the court that have really affected them. And that's not even counting Doug McDaniel, because I'm counting that as like more of a net positive, because he came out of it and has become more of a leader. So you've really had 3 misses off the court that have kind of derailed parts of the last 2 seasons.
Yeah. I thought there were parts of the story that Kellis Robinette wrote in the Wichita Eagle and Kansas City Star, where he talked to Jerome Tang, is insightful. There were also other parts of it that were obviously just lip service, and that's what, coaches and people have to do. So, like, I don't fault Jerome Tang for that and how some people would take it, but it's one of those where you have to go out and prove it now. Like, you can say all the right things, you actually have to go out and do the right things. I tell my wife all the time that I'm going to start the laundry or the dishwasher, and then we wake up at 7 a.m. She's like, "Did you not start that last night?" I'm like, "Oh man, I forgot," and I apologize. But then I make the same mistake over and over again. Unfortunately, I guess marriage contracts are a little bit safer than college basketball coaching contracts, because I don't think she's going to fire me just for those problems. I bring enough other things to the table, but this is, that's one of those things where now you have to actually make the changes, because I feel like the staff thought that there was a wave of problems that they had after last year that they needed to change. Obviously they did, because they didn't bring back hardly anybody from last year's team. And so you probably thought, those guys are part of our problem. We need to do this to be better. And their plan was totally wrong. And so now you have to go through it. So the 3 things that I think are the most important, there's a fourth in there. Number 1, like you said, it's got to be the staff turnover has to happen quickly. So that needs to happen at some point in the week. I don't think that should even be an option. I think if I was Gene Taylor, I would be going to Jerome Tang and saying, it's not just that we missed the NCAA tournament 2 years in a row. It's the way that it went down in both of the seasons. We need substantial changes within this program. And that doesn't mean that, anybody that leaves is an idiot or they're bad at their job. They just weren't right for this job in this current moment. I think that to make it a significant enough change and to totally reset your priorities, there probably has to be at least 2 changes made to that core coaching staff. Personally, I would have thought about going further than that. I don't think Jerome Tang will go further than that. I think K-State fans should feel like things are moving pretty well if there's a good enough reset. A good enough reset there with 2. The second thing that I have is kind of like what you talked about as well. You have to reset your recruiting priorities. So Jerome Tang, and he addressed that, like they went all in. They thought the NIL was a thing. He talked about coaching them differently because of it, which I thought that seemed a little strange for Jerome Tang to be somebody to do that. I would not have anticipated that. I would have assumed that he still would have viewed it as, hey, we're going to use the NIL to get guys here, but he's still going to be Jerome Tang to him. And now maybe the fact that there would be so much financial motivation that should be there for these guys, that does change it in some way. Where if you're a college basketball coach and you're saying, hey, we're giving you $1 million and you're going to bring this piss poor effort for us and you're going to do this. And like, I could see how that would grind on you a little bit more. But to avoid that, I think that's why the first 3 things that you bring to the table when looking for a guy right now, it should still be all the same old stuff that mattered before NIL exploded. You need to find a guy that has the right personality, that he has skills that translate to the level of basketball that you're asking him to play. So they need to be able to play in the Big 12 conference. They need skills that translate to that. And that's why it fires me up every time people try to talk down on Brendan Hausen. He's got a skill, his shooting, that translates to the Big 12. He should be a guy that he would play 20 to 25 minutes on any team in the Big 12 right now. He has a skill that every team would be able to use. You can talk about defense all you want, but guess what? That plays into this whole recruiting thing where Brendan Hausen's never going to be a great defender. Guys like him never are great defenders. So it's on the coaching staff to do a better job defensively, and it's on them to find players that, when there's 4 guys on the floor with a Brendan Hausen, they have to be able to pick up some of the slack. They're going to have to be better. And that's where K-State struggled earlier in the year. They didn't have guys picking up the slack. And as the season wore on, they did pick up the slack a little bit better. And Brendan Hausen just worked his butt off and became a better defender and did a lot of other things on the floor that I never would have expected from him.
Yeah, I would even add with Hausen that this was also probably, if you asked him, he would probably admit it, that this was probably the hardest that he's had to work in his college career because he did work his butt off to be a good defender. So I would even say that this year was kind of up and down, which is crazy because he still ended, I think, like 38% from 3. But you could make an argument that next year he'll be even better because he'll be more used to playing defense like he's supposed to play defense every night. So I'm not worried about him.
Yeah, so I think you go into that, you need to make sure you get the personalities right, because I know people will roll their eyes and they'll think that, well, there were still problems on the stretch when things came together. That's true. If you get the Doug McDaniel you had from February on in the first 2 months of the season, K-State's playing in the NCAA tournament on Thursday. If you get the Coleman Hawkins that you had, the complete version of Coleman Hawkins that you had from conference play on, you're playing in the NCAA tournament on Thursday. It's as simple as that. They just had guys that early on, the personalities were not where they needed to be. And that hindered them. And I talked about it in a post on the message boards, but this is a situation where I don't think Coleman Hawkins didn't ever give you his best in the course of a game. I think he was always trying. Now, are there moments where he maybe would pout or loaf a little bit? Yeah, he that's just kind of who he is in game. He can be an emotional and pouty guy at times. But I think he showed up every day that there was a game, and for those 40 minutes, he wanted to win. He wanted to play hard in those 40 minutes. But we know in college basketball, it's not just what you do in the 40 minutes that translate to winning. You have to do things outside of the 40 minutes to be able to play to the level you need to in the 40 minutes. And that didn't click with him until the season wore on. And it was clear to me after the Iowa State game that it had clicked at that point, because you could tell just how badly he wanted that game for Jerome Tang. Like that, I think that team knew how important that game was for K-State and Jerome Tang, and they wanted it for him. And they went out there and they did it, and you could see the love and how much they enjoyed that moment. And that's where, it didn't come together. And it's no coincidence that when it all clicked for Coleman Hawkins, a couple of weeks later, Doug McDaniel finally fell into line. And, that's why now you're in a position where this team's talking about Doug McDaniel, and Doug McDaniel's talking about being back on next year's team. So you have to make sure that when you bring guys in this time, you don't have to wait 2.5 months to get the best version of them. You also can't bring in a guy that's going to get kicked off the team before you even hit the new year. So no more chores. You can't do that. No more Naquan Tomlins. Like I know people get real sensitive about that situation, but Naquan Tomlin put himself in a position to where he could possibly be kicked off the team, and he was kicked off the team. You can't be doing that when you have guys that in August and September you think you're going to count on to make you a good basketball team, and then you get to conference play and they're not even on the roster anymore. You have to make sure that the guys that you have and are counting on, you're still going to be able to at least have and use at some point when you're playing teams like Kansas or Arizona or Iowa State. Like when conference play starts, you need to have your entire roster available as long as they don't get injured. And then if you're looking for like specific needs in the portal, we know this team is going to need somebody else that can handle the ball, whether that's somebody that comes in and you think can coexist for a lot of minutes on the floor with Doug McDaniel and be a starter, or if it's somebody that you think you just trust for 15, 20 minutes a game to be out there, and maybe they don't have a lot of other things they can do, but they can pass the ball, they can handle the ball, they can play some defense. Basically what Desi Sills was, and Desi turned into a much better player than that, but like Desi couldn't shoot the ball well. He could finish at the rim, but he couldn't shoot. Like he wasn't adding that, but he did so many of the other things.
He did in that KU game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the most random 24 points of all time. Trying to think, it was during the UCF KU game last week, and at one point, the UCF was kind of going off there, and I think Gabe said that's the loudest 24 points that I've ever seen, and I said I would actually argue Desi Sills had the loudest 24, because every shot that went down in that game against KU, you're like, Desi Sills is doing this, the bank three, like all that. But you need to find something like that. And I know that people are going to probably wonder if Bennett Sturts is going to be a guy that would be a possibility there. I think that's probably all just going to be pretty dependent on what takes place with his portal process, if that's what ends up happening, because I think a lot of people assume that McCollum's not going to be at Drake next year. And then you look around, who else would kind of fit that profile? This team is also going to need at least one significant player over, I'd say 6'8", 6'9", that's going to play a majority of the time for you. And
probably two.
And probably two. Yeah, exactly. Like you're stacking up, because we know that bigs, like that's a pretty expensive thing to try and get in the portal. And then I still say, in an ideal world, and you may not be able to pull this off with all the other things that you're asking to do, you would like Max Jones, if he gets that waiver, to come back next year to be your sixth man. I just think that would still, like, if you do that puts you in a pretty good spot. If you have to start Max Jones, I think you're looking at this team and you're saying, okay, best case scenario, like you're probably like a 6 seed next year in the NCAA tournament, which obviously people would take. Like there's nothing wrong with that. But if Max Jones is the first guy off the bench, then we're talking about this team being a lot more like the 2023 team that could be, a preferential seed as opposed to anything else.
I love Max Jones and what he brings to the table. I love what Brendan Hazen brings to the table. In an ideal world, both of those guys come off the bench.
All right. Well, we didn't need to say that about Brendan, but
like when I said almost a year ago now that Brendan Hazen is a guy that can win K-State an NCAA tournament game, Like my thought was that he'd be playing like 15 to 20 minutes a night, come in, hit threes, play decent defense, call it good. So like I think in an ideal world, you have both those guys like your sixth and seventh man, if they would be willing to do that. And I think that both of those guys would, because I think both of those guys really appreciate what K-State has really done for them and growing their career. So, and I think that there was kind of some whispers about when Max Jones even committed that like he was probably going to be a guy that was more sixth man than starting. So I think that
Yeah.
there's a world where you have both guys come off the bench.
Yeah, I obviously love Brendan Hazen because I love the fact that K-State finally has a guy that can shoot it like that. And by the way, he was 38.8% this year, so that's pretty good on the volume that he was firing it from. He averaged over 27 minutes a game, and even I am aware, as somebody that loves shooters, loves Brendan Hazen, he needs to be more in that average of 20 to 25 range. He had probably far too many games this year where he had to play 30 minutes. I mean, he played 35 minutes in the win over Arizona State last week. He played 30 minutes in the win over Colorado. He hit 32 against KU, 30 against Arizona State, 31 against Iowa State, 29 against West Virginia, 28, 29 against Tech and Houston, 31 against TCU,
And
37 against St. John's. And then he had a lot of 30 minutes early in the year too, which is a big highlight of where issues were for this team with McDaniel and Hawkins, because you weren't getting enough out of them to where they had to play Brendan Hazen that much. And coincidentally, those are some of Hazen's worst shooting games of the season, is those ones early in the year where he was having to play a lot. So that's just something to keep in mind.
I don't even think that's a coincidence. I think that is straight up the cause. Like
Yeah.
a shooter that really, again, I love Brendan Hazen and what he brings to the table, but his only real like true skill is shooting the ball. And a lot of guys that if that's their one true skill, you don't play them 30 plus minutes
Yeah.
because their legs are dead by the end of the game.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. That's a little look at men's basketball. We'll dive into more of it in the coming days and weeks. I promise tomorrow we'll talk about football though for everybody. We'll get on to some football stuff. Unless something crazy happens basketball wise, then we're right back here. Let's talk about
Still crazy we still haven't started spring football. It's St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, well, it takes time to get into it. Let's dive into a team that is playing basketball later on into March. That'd be the K-State women. They did not get to host. They just missed out on that. So they will travel to Lexington this week to take on Kentucky. We would assume as long as they get past Fairfield and then Kentucky gets past Liberty. This is a pretty interesting matchup. I went on Bosco's Boys a couple weeks ago, and I had written Kentucky out of the hosting situation altogether because I said, man, do you see how they finish? Like, I just think they're going to have a tough time kind of closing this thing out. Like, it's a tough stretch. Then they navigated that tough stretch about as well as they could have. Their season, they finished with Texas, Georgia, Missouri, LSU, Tennessee, South Carolina, and Oklahoma. So their last 4 games of the year were against teams that were ranked 11th or better, and then Texas was 3rd. They got through that stretch, and they got a crucial win by 24 points over Tennessee. If they lose that, they finish in a similar fashion to K-State, and there could be a real argument there that maybe this thing is flipped around a little bit. So this isn't like a team that is unbeatable that K-State is going to have to go face, but Kentucky played some really good basketball at different points this season, and most of their losses came to teams that were top 10 teams in the SEC, which is probably the best women's basketball conference in the country without much competition in that realm. What do you think of the draw for the K-State women, Drew?
Another team that I had written off from potentially hosting was Maryland. So I was shocked to see Maryland on there. But it's not like an overwhelming draw for K-State, but probably isn't the best. Like you're facing one of the best low major, because that's kind of what Fairfield is. They're a low major team, and instead of a mid major, you're facing one of the best low major teams. They did give Oklahoma State a run for their money earlier this year in Stillwater. They did lose to a not so good St. John's women's team. So I think that Fairfield's probably not like going to be too much to handle. Like they're solid, but the one thing that will be really interesting to kind of see and where the game will be won is Fairfield is one of the best 3-point defenses in the entire country. They rank number 9 in 3-point defense. We know that in K-State's losses, not only do teams, especially this year, typically have really athletic guards that have beat K-State, but K-State hasn't shot the ball well in any of their losses. So I think that's something to really keep in mind for the first game Friday. I think it's 1:30 on ESPN News. So that will be the game on Friday. And then Kentucky is very similar to K-State. Like, again, not a team that really is like will overwhelm you. They do have an athletic guard, so that scares me a little bit. They didn't end the season well, and you kind of pointed that out. Lost in the first round of the SEC tournament or their first game to Oklahoma. Kentucky's really, really good at home. And then again, the thing that probably scares you the most about Kentucky would be just that you are playing them on the road in a true road game, because there's nothing overwhelming about what Kentucky does. They're a pretty solid 2-point shooting defense and shooting team, and they're pretty solid 3-point defense as well. But again, they don't really turn you over a ton. The toughest part about that second game will be that you're playing a true road game. And that's why it was so important for K-State to finish the season strong so that they could host. Because you get such an advantage here in the women's tournament if you are in that top 16 national seeds and you get to host. So playing on the road will be tough. But if you're looking at like the 4 lines, this is probably the second best one that K-State could have gotten. I think that the best probably would have actually been Maryland, because Maryland is pretty beat up right now.
Mm-hmm.
But this is probably the second best 4 that you could have got to face, because they're not overwhelming. Like, and you also weren't going to get Baylor, but like the athletic profile and just profile of Baylor is a team that beats K-State a lot.
Yeah. Yep. Nope. That I agree with that. And yeah, Baylor. Ooh, watch out. Watch out. Here's what I want to ask you about now, because it was 2 weeks ago today that Jeff Mittie started his radio show by saying that he didn't address these rumors typically and all of this other stuff, and basically saying, no, I don't know why my name's being thrown around for the Missouri job. 2 weeks later, it's a little bit of a different tone from Jeff Mittie, who hit kind of all of the notes of coaches that in the past are actually entertaining other jobs by saying, oh, this is my team right now, I'm not going to talk about that. It's a little bit of a tone shift from a guy that 2 weeks ago wanted to shut down any internet rumors about it. What do you make of how Jeff Mittie has changed in talking about the possibility of him being the next Missouri head coach?
Yeah, that'll be interesting. For me, though, and like, I get it, because we're in the sphere and everybody wants to know about that kind of stuff. But I actually kind of like despise when those questions are asked, because what do you really want the coach to say? Because
to come out and say I'm not going to do it, you know?
But there's even instances of like coaches saying that they're not going to do it and then they do it. Like Roy Williams is like the prime example of that. I think he said something about like that he wasn't even like thinking of North Carolina or whatever, and then took that job. It's like, I get it, but those questions just like bug me for some reason, because the coaches can never do anything right in that scenario. I do think that I'm coming around to kind of like what DY has pointed out on the boards. you would rather have Jeff Mittie be your coach than not, because you at least know what the result is in a non-revenue sport at K-State. Like, that is probably what you want more than the unknown of somebody else. Like, it can be better, obviously. Like, Jeff Mittie hasn't made a second weekend yet and hasn't won the Big 12 title yet, but it could also go like so south that it worries you a little bit, especially because, again, that just a whole non-revenue sport thing, because you don't necessarily want to fire those coaches because they're so bad. So I think I'd rather have somebody that's just routinely solid than kind of roll the dice.
Yeah, I mean, you'd rather have Jeff Mittie than not, but I think this is one of those where if it comes about, like, you don't need to overcommit in a
Yes.
way that
No, I agree with
doesn't
that.
make a ton of sense. Like, everybody is worth something. It's just a matter of, when you get it, are you still going to be worth that in a couple of years? We'll see. I mean, Gene Taylor already has a situation like that on his hands. So that it's going to be interesting to follow that. I'm not going to doubt that Jeff Mittie is focused on winning with this team, because these are his players. Like, he cares deeply about them. He's been overly committed to them, for some of them for 7 years now. Like, he
Yeah,
wants
Aoka
to.
Lee was almost like, she started school like right after I did
Oh,
at
I
K-State.
I can remember. Would have been the summer after my sophomore year had ended, or like towards the tail end of my sophomore year. I was umpiring baseball in Manhattan, and one of the scorekeepers there had played at Manhattan High with Chrissy Carr, and so we were talking in between innings one time, and it was over there at Seco Park, so close, kind of close or whatever. And a bunch of the women's basketball players came coming through, and she pointed out Aoka Lee, and she's like, "Oh, that girl's name is Aoka. She's going to be really good." And it was talking about how she likes her name. I was like, "Okay, whatever. Yeah, I'm sure." Because I do that. I tend to do that when people tell me somebody's going to be good, like the guy with one arm in the Lloyd Noble Center in 2017 that told me Trae Young was going to be really good and an NBA player. He said, "We got some local kid coming in next year. He's incredible. He's going to be amazing." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, I bet. Norman, Oklahoma, I'm sure. And then got up and said, "Well, travel safe," after Bruce got his ass kicked by 30 in Norman, and the guy only had one arm. But he was right. Trae Young was awesome. And yeah, Aoka Lee turned out to
Still
be
is
pretty good
awesome.
too. Yes, kind of. Hawks, high volume. He's in the NBA. He's playing. He's a good basketball player. Awesome. Maybe not for an NBA player. Above average, yes, we'll give him that. So yeah, she's been here a long time, and you have an investment there. So I don't worry about that. It's just everything that's going to come once this thing ends will be pretty interesting to see how both Jeff Mittie and Gene Taylor decide to navigate it. All right, main event time, Drew. It's time to talk about losers, because I've been getting frustrated with every tweet that I see, every comment from all these newcomers to the Big 12 that are talking bad about Kansas City as the host location for the Big 12 tournament, because we all know that Big 12 basketball, it belongs in Kansas City. We have a long history of some other places where we just know that, hey, it didn't do as well when it went to other places. We can look at that and we can see it. Like, it's right there in front of us. If you're wondering, okay, where, what do we have to compare to here? 2009 was the last year that the Big 12 tournament was not in Kansas City. That was in Oklahoma City. Attendance total was 94,614. The following year, it moved to Kansas City, and you got over 113,000 people there. That's a pretty significant jump. So we can go on, we can look at it and everything else that plays into it. Like, attendance was lower whenever this thing would move to a different arena. So you look at 2002 was the the Big 12 started in 97. They run all the way through. 2002 is the last year they played at Kemper before they took a little hiatus. 104,000 people. The following year, they go to the AAC, home of the Dallas Mavericks. Less than 10,000 people drop off. So it's a 10,000 drop off. They went from 104,740 to 94,800 down in Dallas. So they were there for a year. Attendance did bump up the following year to 105,000. Texas played in the title game that year, lost to Oklahoma State. The following year, though, they come to Kansas City, and guess what? Attendance jumps up 109,000, so you get a boost there. They go back to Dallas in 2006. Attendance stayed about at that 109,000 number, which, keep in mind, Drew, do you know, have you checked the census in the last couple of years? Dallas has a bigger population than Kansas City, if you weren't aware.
Wow, that's brand new news to me.
So
Had
just
no
put that
idea.
out there. Yeah, just put that out there. Okay, so they're at the AAC in 06. Then they go 2007 back to Oklahoma City. 113,000 people show up in Oklahoma City. That's pretty good. KU beat Texas that year. Kevin Durant was the MOP of the tournament. Probably some foreshadowing there for Kevin Durant because he'd come back to that building about 3 years later and lead the Oklahoma City Thunder to some glory days.
He's still awesome.
He is still awesome. That is true. Well, kind of. I don't know. Suns, have you seen? They've got some problems going on right now. But individually, he is still awesome. The following year, they stay basically at identical numbers when they come back to Kansas City. That was a KU-Texas final again. KU and Texas played the final 3 straight years. Then one final trip to Oklahoma City. They dropped from 113,000 people down to that 94,000 number. They returned to Kansas City in 2010. It goes up to 113,000. Also, the final that year, it probably helped. It was KU K-State, and they played to a 72-64 final score. Then every year since then, the Big 12 tournament in Kansas City, in normal circumstances, has gone over the 90,000 attendance mark, except for 2018 when KU beat West Virginia. That was at 89,000 for some reason, but attendance has been pretty good in Kansas City. But for some reason, we have all these newcomers that are coming in and saying, oh, why are you doing it in Kansas City? Kansas City sucks. It needs to be somewhere else. But do it for us. It doesn't make any sense to do it anywhere else. And I'm okay if at some point down the road, the Big 12 wants to say, hey, every 5th year or something, we can play it somewhere different. Or every 4th year. So if you get a rare 4-year player, they'll play 3 of these things in Kansas City, and then one of them will get played in whatever other location that you want to talk about. But I did some comparing here, Drew, to see just where we could do this thing. If people are wanting to have a serious conversation about why is Kansas City the best place over Las Vegas or Nashville or Dallas or Oklahoma City or all these different places.
I saw somebody randomly say New Orleans. Like,
yeah,
that's
that's
probably the worst place.
By the way, I've got some New Orleans topics of conversation there for you. The SEC went to New Orleans in 2012. They have not been back. So they've been to Nashville. They've been to Atlanta. They've been to St. Louis. They've been to Tampa. They have not gone back to New Orleans since 13 years ago. So just something to keep in mind. You look, though, at Big 12 and how this attendance shakedown has worked compared to the Pac-12, because I really just see most of the Pac-12 people complaining about this. Cincinnati you can get a rogue Cincinnati fan that wants to throw it out there. And I just would say, where do you want us to play this thing? If you're a Bearcat, I
had some rogue Oklahoma State people, but that was because Jeff Goodman was being an idiot. On my timeline.
You know what? I also saw a lot of Oklahoma City people defending Kansas City, or Oklahoma State people defending Kansas City. And I will say this, if I was feeling the urge to reward somebody, it would be Oklahoma State fans, because while there are not a ton of them in Kansas City, and I don't fault them for that, their team has sucked for a while now, they love ball, because I saw way more Oklahoma State fans there as just fans want to watch basketball than I would have expected for a team that was going to get bounced in the first round. So if we're talking about who deserves a little reward, I would be willing to listen to Oklahoma State fans. Because, Drew, you know what I didn't see? I didn't see any Utah fans
Utah.
wandering around Kansas City. And that's where my real issue with this comes from, is a bunch of these people that are moaning about, oh, Kansas City, it's so far, it's blah, blah, blah. I didn't see these people in Kansas City. I didn't see Utah fans there. I didn't see Arizona media members that were constantly bitching about it in Kansas City. This was set in stone a long time ago. You're new here. Like, you just joined this sucker. Even if they wanted to try to cater to some of the new schools, which in some ways you do need to give a little bit to them at times, you can't do it in year one. Contracts are in place. So suck it up for at least the first year, and before you dump on it, come show up and give it a chance. It also doesn't help that we've got dopes out there tweeting out video of what the arena looks like before it's totally filled in, because then you've got these people running with it like, oh, Kansas City this, Kansas City that. I thought every night, even when I thought attendance wasn't going to be great, by the time the ball tipped, it had filled in pretty nicely. You know, I thought K-State wasn't going to have the best of crowds a couple of those nights. They still didn't, but this team finished below 500. It still filled in pretty nicely for those nights. But I'm going to ask you this question, Drew. If we're talking about the Big 12 tournament and attendance, only one round or only one session of the Big 12 tournament didn't hit at least 12,000 people walking through the gate. Do you want to take a guess what session that was?
Was that the session of the semifinals?
No, it was Oklahoma State, Cincinnati, TCU, and Colorado. There were 6,400 people there when things started on Tuesday. So,
and that's number one, just those fan bases and those teams.
Yeah.
But I think that's also like what you get when you start a tournament now at Tuesday at 11 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah,
Like,
and by that and by that evening, they had almost 13,000 people there, and that was K-State, Arizona State, Utah, UCF. Three fan bases that did not, like, we were not going to travel. Again, we know Utah didn't travel because they just sat in Salt Lake City and complained the whole time. And then Arizona State and UCF, sorry to those of you that are out there, there was only one Arizona State fan I saw in the building, and he was working media and lives in Kansas City.
My whole issue with it, I think, is like not even the fans that are complaining, but like the media members that complained that weren't even there. Like, if you didn't even bother to show up, you don't have a right to complain, because I think that everybody just assumes that because it's in Kansas City and they don't have an NBA team, that like they're probably just like playing in a shithole. But like the T-Mobile Center is so nice, and especially like for what Kemper was.
Yeah.
The T-Mobile Center is such an upgrade. But yeah, if you aren't there, you don't get to complain. The good news is that Utah is playing in Las Vegas for the college basketball crown.
True.
From what I've been told and from what I've seen,
They travel.
yeah, if Utah plays a game in Vegas, it's supposed to be packed. So I'm expecting Utah fans to sell out the college basketball crown because they're playing in Vegas.
They should.
Without a coach.
Yeah, without a coach. And then just for some of my more notable comparisons, the best year of attendance ever that the Pac-12 had since they went to 12 teams and were playing in Las Vegas every year since 2013. They got 87,910 people in 2017. Again, the Big 12's worst year of attendance in normal circumstances would be 79,846. That was 2022. But there are still some oddities within that where, we know K-State fired Bruce Weber the very next day, and there was only one game on Wednesday night because Oklahoma State was serving their postseason ban that year. So there was not another game to be played, just one game that first night of it. But outside of that, the Big 12, every single year, even their bad years, were better than the best for the Pac-12. Best Pac-12 tournament attendance in the 11 seasons that they were in Las Vegas, 87,000 and then 80,000. They only hit 80,000 twice while they were in Las Vegas. The Big 12 only failed to hit 80,000 one time.
I'm just gonna rip the Band-Aid. The schools that came in from the Pac-12 don't really care about sports. Like their fan bases pretend like they do, but they really don't.
It's not that they pretend that they do. It's just that there are so few that actually do, I think. Well, although Utah, they should be big enough. They're pretty loud, but
I
I haven't seen much of it since they joined the Big 12.
I'm waiting for Utah to be good at literally one sport.
Yeah. Well, we know it's not baseball
Or
so.
football, or basketball, or women's basketball even.
Well, they made the tournament in women's basketball. You'd be
Ooh.
surprised. They're actually
They still got bounced first round. Their first game in Kansas City.
It's true. Against a bad team.
Still didn't even finish in the top 4 in the Big 12. Or even I don't even think the top 5.
Oh, hey,
So
neither did K-State.
I'm still waiting for Utah to be good at literally one thing.
I did some other comparisons here, Drew. Here are some of the proposed sites that we're throwing out there. We're not even taking New Orleans as serious. Here's what you're looking at, people. Kansas City, Las Vegas, Nashville, Dallas, and Oklahoma City. I have the average distance for each school to travel there. That is by a drive, because that's what these tournaments are for. That's why when people try to point out what the SEC does, the SEC has an advantage, unlike any other league. Maybe the Big Ten still a little bit, but now with the coastal schools, not really. The SEC,
because
all their
conference
teams are
drivable.
Everything, and more for some of them. It's more than drivable. Most of them are pretty compact in there. The SEC has an advantage in this that everybody should be jealous of, because the SEC, even though they've expanded, is still getting to do this thing for the most part like college sports were meant to be, where everything's regional. Like, their region has gotten a little bigger, but it's still like, if somebody looked at it on a map, they'd go, oh, that's like legit. That matches up together. You could say that Texas being counted with like these southern schools. Yeah, okay. When you look at a Big Ten map and you're like, oh, wait, so the Big Ten has a school in New Jersey, but also schools in California and Washington and Oregon. Those don't go together. And, the Big 12 now, you kind of look at it and you go, well, I can see that these states are connected. Like, but West Virginia and Arizona and Utah, like, there's an advantage there unlike any other. So you have to factor into all this. So you see the average distance for each school, and then also that bottom row, that is the closest location for those schools. So for Kansas City, the average distance for each Big 12 school is 699 miles. K-State, Colorado, KU, and Iowa State, that is your closest destination. In Las Vegas, shout out to the BYU fans. They were there all week. There were a lot of them. They love ball. If I needed to throw a bone to BYU fans, I would tell them to go play at the Delta Center. I'd go to Salt Lake City to cater to BYU fans, because they deserve it. They showed up. But the average distance for a Big 12 school to go to Las Vegas for the Big 12 tournament is 1,175 miles. By far the furthest distance on average that a Big 12 school would have to travel. And you'd be catering to Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and BYU. If they did Nashville, which the SEC kind of has a stranglehold on, if you look at how things are set up, the SEC has gone and played 5 of their last, or actually you can go further than that. They've played 7 of their last 9 SEC tournaments in Nashville. They've deviated to go play in Tampa and St. Louis a couple of times, but that would be 945 miles. I could listen to an argument about Nashville if you did it once. If there's a year where the SEC says, hey, we're going somewhere else to cater to some other locations, I could listen to it, especially because I do know West Virginia fans love basketball. And if you were going to give them an easier path to go one time, I'd love to see it. Cincinnati, while some of them I know bother the heck out of Drew, I know that they love basketball, and I know that I enjoyed my time at Fifth Third Arena. So I could listen to it. The American Airlines Center in Dallas, average distance 700 miles. So it just barely loses to Kansas City. that would be the closest for TCU, Baylor, Texas Tech, and Houston. And maybe surprising or unsurprising to some, Oklahoma City has the shortest average distance for Big 12 schools to travel to at 670 miles. The only school that would be the closest site to, though, would be Oklahoma State. And that's where this gets down to. You factor in average distance, which the Oklahoma City wins, but Kansas City is second, missing out by just 29 miles. And then you look at, okay, who has the better collection of closest schools that would benefit us the most? It is by far and away Kansas City with KU, Iowa State, and K-State. And second, if you are talking about catering, I would not argue that Las Vegas is probably the best option with Arizona and BYU having that be the easiest, but it is so far for so many others. And if you're looking at what the Pac-12 did attendance-wise, it'd probably be about the same or a little bit better if you played the Big 12 tournament there, because at the end of the day, we can talk about, people should show up or whatever. And there would be times where I would be willing to pony up money for the flight to go to wherever the Big 12 tournament was, but it's not something that could be done every single year. Nor, would I really want to do that every single year. I mean, I'd want to go, but like a flight every year.
But there's shows.
Yeah. Okay. We'll get into that in a second. But to me, that's one of those things where it doesn't make sense. Like to have 12 of your teams and say you have to fly and get there, because that's really what it is. There's only 4 teams that have it as drivable. 12 would have to fly. And it just doesn't make sense to do it that way, especially when, again, as I show it, Arizona State fans are not going to show up. Utah fans, I'm waiting to see you do anything other than use your thumbs on Twitter. And again, BYU, respect. Every time something comes up where the new schools need to be dumped on, I can't dump on BYU because they show up. They were good at football. They were good at basketball. They're melting snow in less than an hour on their baseball field so they can play UCF over the weekend. Just not going to dump on BYU. They're legit. They're the real deal. The rest of you, I'm just kind of waiting and seeing, because I saw a couple of Arizona fans in Kansas City, but not very many. And I saw more Arizona media members complaining on social media about Kansas City than ones that were actually in Kansas City. So that to me is a big issue. Dallas, again, like you look there, distance-wise, okay, but it doesn't make sense. Like TCU is not going to bring a ton of people. Baylor is not going to bring a ton of people. Texas Tech probably would if you put it in Dallas. And Houston, again, great team, good, small, strong fan base, but it's just not there with the widespread appeal for those schools. And then Oklahoma State, same type of deal. Respect to those of you that are still grinding and love ball, but not everybody does. And that's just not a good team right now. You just don't cater to Oklahoma City. So that would be the case for Kansas City. And you brought up, there's shows in Vegas. There's this, there's that. Well, let me tell you this, Drew. We got to T-Mobile Center at like 10:30, 10 o'clock every day. We got downtown. First game tipped off at 11:30 for those first 3 days. We didn't get back to the hotel until like 11 o'clock. And that's just, K-State played that earlier evening game. So we were done with work by then. It's not like we were sitting around working. By the time the game's in and you got back to the hotel, I just want to go to sleep. Like if you're there for basketball, this is a vacation to watch basketball, not a vacation to do other stuff. And then, basketball's on the side.
Well, that's what other people think. And I think that's what the biggest misconception is.
And that's the problem with those people, because you know what fan bases I saw sitting inside the arena on Thursday, that last day when it was it was Houston and Colorado playing. I saw BYU blue. I saw Iowa State fans, even after a heartbreaking loss. I saw lavender a day after K-State had been bounced. I saw Jayhawks in the crowd. I saw those Oklahoma State fans. Shout out to the grandpa the father and the two kids, like I idolize that family. Like that's a family that's probably been doing this thing year after year. They go together and they watch their pokes suck, and I respect them for it. Like that's what I saw. But I didn't see Colorado fans outside of the friends and family section there. I didn't see Houston fans outside of the friend and family section there. You can probably attest. What was the Arizona KU crowd like on that evening? Because I wasn't there for the last half of the day in Texas Tech Baylor.
There were some scattered Arizona fans, but like a majority of theirs was just the friends and family section, and then just like random little pockets. It was a very KU crowd, which I guess was to be expected, but I would have expected a little bit more from Arizona, to be honest with you. The other thing that I would just say of like, for me, for it to be in Kansas City still, we're running out of traditions in college sports at the moment. Why would you get rid of one that has been a conference staple the last 15, 20 years?
That a majority of the schools that are in the league that are still here, they love it. And that's not just the ones that it's close to and that they have, they can go sleep in their own beds, or like it's a 3-4 hour drive for them if you're Iowa State people and you get to stay a couple days in Kansas City.
Scott
It's
Drew's a big
everybody.
Kansas City guy.
Exactly. And I don't remember you and I complaining in 2022 about having to drive to Arlington for the Big 12 championship game, right? Like,
no,
I haven't heard Iowa State people complain about that drive.
People are just, especially the new teams, just feel like they like to complain about how things are.
Hey, Utah, how about you worry about how long you have to travel to get to the Big 12 title game when you finally get there? We'll just cross that bridge when we finally get to it. But yeah, it's ridiculous. You're not there for anything but basketball, and if you are, then like
you shouldn't show up.
Yeah, and that's probably why your Pac-12 tournament attendance was so low. Is that if you're just showing up to watch your team, like you're there for basketball. And by the way, if you need something to kill your time during your basketball trip, the college basketball experience is right there. And like, that's a great thing.
We did it.
I know that there's just a ton of people that go to Kansas City. They embrace that you're there for the Big 12 tournament. That's all you got to do. And guess what? If you're some kind of degenerate that really needs to gamble, there are casinos in Kansas City. Like that was the thing I didn't understand about my time in Vegas is like
the novelty of Vegas is gone.
Like, yeah, you can gamble anywhere on sports, on whatever. Like, you don't need to go to Vegas for it. If you're standing that hard for Vegas or New Orleans, no offense, but I think you're in most situations, you're probably a pretty trashy person. Like, because those are two of the trashiest cities that I've ever been to.
Oh, I was going to say that if you're standing for Vegas or New Orleans, just call the betting hotline. Like you can sports bet anywhere now, pretty much. You can gamble anywhere now. Like, and if you really have a hankering for sports betting so badly, you can just do what we did, and we stayed on the Kansas side. It literally is not hard.
Yep, not hard at all. But it is really hard, I guess, if your schools suck and you are still dreaming about a conference that died because of lack of direction at the top. So I don't know. It really bothers me when I see these people talking about, oh, we got to move, we got to do this. It doesn't have to be in Kansas City every single year. I like it to be that way just because of the tradition, because I can guarantee, if this was something where it was well received and it had been in Oklahoma City or Dallas every year, I have no problem doing that. I'd have no problem being excited that instead of going to Kansas City, I'm going to OKC or Dallas, or, Missouri Valley fans, they still get fired up about going to St. Louis. Like, I never heard Wichita State fans complain about having to make the drive to St. Louis, and it's not a fun one from Wichita. Like, they could have easily made the case, oh, bring it here. I will tell you this. I have been to the American Athletic Conference tournament in Fort Worth. Nobody shows up. By the way, I saw that, that somebody threw out Orlando at one point. The AAC did their conference tournament in Orlando. Nobody showed up to the Magic Arena to watch this conference play. If the AAC wanted to talk about needing to move their conference tournament, I would argue that it should go to Wichita or somewhere closer to Memphis, where probably your two best basketball fan bases are. That would make a lot more sense. But I just, if you have a real problem, you need to address it. Maybe the Pac-12 should have discussed moving it out of Vegas. Maybe they would have done a little bit better, been a little bit closer to all the other leagues.
Maybe they'd still be surviving.
True, because I also have numbers, Drew, that if you break down attendance divided by the teams in your league, most years the Big 12 outdid the SEC, even though the SEC had 4 teams more than the Big 12 in most years. So, like, everybody else was finding a way to do this thing at a big level. The Pac-12 was not. So it is funny that the schools that came from the league that doesn't exist anymore are the ones trying to tell people how they should run a conference. It's comical stuff. It's stupid stuff. And that's why Kansas City deserves to be here, because it makes the most sense for a majority of your fan bases. It's a fairly easy trip. And the 3 fan bases that I think will show up the most, 3 of the top 5 or 6, they are all right in this area. And I know that 2 of those 3 are going to be in the top 2 almost every year. KU and Iowa State almost every year will be the majority of fan bases that you have. And I don't even really care if it's in Kansas City or wherever else. I would have confidence in those 2 showing up for that. Also highlights why K-State needs to get better in a hurry, because it was embarrassing and disappointing to not see as much purple Tuesday and Wednesday as you would have liked there. But we know that when K-State's good, they are going to get the same thing, or even if they are just in the realm of being good and vibes are okay, it's going to be there. So,
or if they are so bad that like a coach is potentially being fired, because the Bruce's last game, at least it felt like it was pretty well attended
because they wanted him out. I did get asked when I was showing these attendance numbers to Alec and Gabe. They said, what happened in 2022? Why was it so much lower that year or whatever? And I said, well, that was Bruce's last year. But if you look at it, like the Big 12 got 15,000 people for almost every session that year. So,
and that's impressive with how bad that West Virginia and K-State team both were on that first night.
They still did pretty good in those circumstances. And then if you want to look at years where K-State and KU were both good, like 2019, Big 12 got over 18,000 for every session. So that was, people that wanted to be there. They bought tickets. They were there frequently. You had K-State, KU, and Iowa State all in the top 5 of the conference. So it's the place. Kansas City is the right spot for it. And if you're showing up and you're worried about stuff that doesn't pertain to basketball, you weren't even really going for basketball in the first place then. Because if you were, you'd be there for all 4 games in a day. Because I know that's what I'd be doing, what I did. I know that's what Drew would be doing. I know that's what my family would be like. I just know that that's how most of the people in this area would operate. And the vibe I get is these Pac-12 people, they are not about that. They're about all the other stuff that goes with it. So that will do it for today's edition of the KSO Show. Drew and I will get back together tomorrow to talk a little K-State football, dive into some topics there. And then we'll have stuff throughout the week for you. Plenty of written coverage over at On3 and KStateOnline.com. And then we'll probably have to get together at some point when some significant news starts to trickle in for K-State basketball, because we know that the portal will start to get some attention. We think that there, we already said it. We think that there should be some staff changes. Will they actually happen? If they do, we'll be right here with the breaking news on KSO. So that's Drew Galloway. I'm Mason Voth. We are out of here. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.